Some people think that our world is a simulation.
Is this real? Is this real? You are living in a computer.
I don't agree. But how do you explain this?
Oh, yeah.
Or this? How about this? Just a glitch in the simulation? Or does it all have a scientific explanation? Let's find out. When you hear that frogs or fish have fallen out of the sky, you just want to smile. Yeah. Too much wind picked those poor things up again and took them to who knows where. The Greek philosopher Heraclides Lembas, who lived in the 2nd century, had already mentioned frog rains. But what if the rain is red, like somebody's slightly diluted blood pouring from the sky?
This rain, it's blood red.
Whenever it rains like this, the locals immediately suspect the end of the world has come. It's hard to judge them because it all looks really creepy, and while at first scientists suspected a meteorite that shattered into lots of little metal fragments and they stained the water?
What?
It turns out that it was all about algae spores. They'd been absorbed by the clouds and then stained the water. Look, even the meteorite version seems more real. Spores that got into the clouds to then paint the rain red and scare everyone half to death? I'd rather believe it snowed in the desert than it did snow there, didn't it? The Sahara and snowfall aren't easy to associate, even in the imagination, but sometimes nature fails. Very, very rarely. It's happened only 4 times in the last 42 years. In 1979, 2017, 2018... By the way, it's the footage from the 18th year that you see now. The last time it snowed in the Sahara was at the end of January 2021. Most of the time, it's pretty peaceful. The temperature drops below zero and the sand is sprinkled with the snow, which makes it look like a chocolate cake. But there are exceptions. In 1979, a snowstorm was strong enough to stop traffic in the Nama province. And in 2017, it snowed up to 3.2 feet thick. For the Sahara, this is like a natural cataclysm. And immediately you start remembering what other bad signs there might be. Frozen desert, blood rain, right, giant locusts.
My hand.
Sometimes nature slips you even that. Honestly, if I saw something like that, I'd react more emotionally than the people in the video, maybe even would have squealed. Because the locusts aren't only gigantic, they also jump.
Oh, he did a backflip!
And the boy has nerves of steel. But most importantly, I've never found an explanation as to why the insects grow to that size. Some species, such as Tripitochris calaris, which seems to be what the kid is touching, are quite large themselves. Apparently the climate, abundance of food, or something else is to blame. But everything has to have a limit. One does not randomly increase certain species or decrease others. Try saying that to nature and it'll respond, "Hold my beer," and point to the Borneo elephants. This subspecies of Asian elephant, which lives in the northeast of the island of Kalimantan, is very small in size. Sometimes the difference with its closest relatives can be 11 inches, sometimes even more. Yes, the elephants you see are adults. They aren't sick, they've just grown up like this, like ponies. And by the way, people are still arguing about whether Borneo's elephants came naturally or were brought to the island by order of the Sultan and then left in the local jungle. I don't think it matters that much. A pygmy elephant. Let's concentrate on this. In fact, its small stature can be explained by insular dwarfism. This phenomenon occurs when a species has lived for many generations on islands without predators or humans. The scarcity of food and relative safety sort of hints that there's no point in growing big and you get different hobbits from the animal world.
Good morning.
Sometimes nature works the other way around, and the animals on the islands get unrealistically big. This is called island gigantism. What about trees that suddenly grow just huge? Well, that's a real glitch in the system. And the most glaring example is Big Lonely Doug.
Oh, yeah.
Big Lonely Doug, named after its species, the Douglas fir, rises in the middle of a clearing surrounded by stumps and tree debris. Most likely it's more than 1,000 years old, more than 230 feet tall, and its trunk is so wide that a small room could fit inside. Despite the booming logging industry in British Columbia, Big Lonely Doug was lucky to be saved. But it must be pretty sad to stand like that, keeping a social distance at all times. Actually, while I was doing the research for this video, I realized that nature often fails in trees, but if the Big Lonely Doug is the only one for many miles, you can find a whole grove of anomalies in Poland. It's a group of 100 oddly curved pine trees that were planted back in 1930, and for some reason all took on a very unusual shape. Who, why, and how bent the trees is a mystery. Maybe man did it, or maybe it was nature itself. But in that case, it was very selective. A perfectly normal forest grows around the bent pines and doesn't react at all to what's happening. Maybe those bent pines just forgot how to grow in the right direction. And it's not as absurd as it might seem at first glance. Sometimes nature, well, goes off course. On November 10, 2019, Yakutian shepherds unexpectedly found flamingos on a frozen lake. To give you an idea of how strange this is, Yakutia is here. Flamingos are common in other regions and prefer warmth, but these birds make seasonal migrations. It's believed that young flamingos with their gray plumage coloration can deviate greatly during their fall migrations. And of course it does happen. But to go as far as Yakutia seems like the biggest fiasco in the history of migrations. But only until you find out what happens to new antelope every year. 1.2 million individuals migrate through the Serengeti ecosystem. They encounter crocodiles and big cats. But the main danger comes from the water. Thousands of antelope cross the Mara River at a time, and many of them simply drown. On average, 6,250 antelope die during the migration, about the same weight as 10 blue whales. Afterwards, all the bodies are just left to rot on the banks, and nature is fine. It's like everything is designed that way. In 2007, during the migration, 10,000 antelopes drowned because one of them chose the wrong place for the crossing, and the rest just followed. No, of course I can guess that all these deaths help the ecosystem and all that, but 10,000? Seriously, nature? You'd think there's something wrong with either the antelopes or the region where the migrations take place. But unlike the situation with the Yakutian flamingo, it's kind of like that circle of life from The Lion King. Many individuals die along the way, but at the same time, many more new ones are born. Nature doesn't have time to think about the ethical side of things, otherwise there just isn't enough time for the rest of the weird stuff that people have to explain. For example, the singing sands. The one thing you wouldn't expect sounds from is sand. This phenomenon can be found in about 35 desert places around the world, which means that not every sandbox will do, and not every sand is ready to sing. So far, it's been found that the sand grains must be round, have a certain diameter, moisture, and contain silica. More often than not, sands begin to sing, although I'd call this sound humming, when they're moved by wind or humans. The nature of the phenomenon is not fully understood, but I hope someone has already used this sound in a sci-fi movie. After all, it's convenient. The planet is unlikely to be outraged over a copyright. That would be strange, because there's still so many places on Earth where any logic breaks down. Singing sand is just one of them. What about the little village where it rains 24 hours, 7 days a week? Mawsynram is located in northeastern India and is considered the wettest place on the planet. The locals really know what bad weather is like. Every year it rains on average more than 400 inches here. Other reports put the numbers at 570 inches. The 98 feet high statue of Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro would be knee-deep in water if that rain fell all at once. They say the residents of Mawsynram are so used to the constant rain that they no longer pay attention to it. They've had to adapt. For example, by making bridges out of the living roots of the rubber tree. Any other wood rots too quickly because of the humidity, so some structures literally have to be grown. And while some people tame huge trees, others tame small ones.
1年、2年、5年、25年。
Well, or not quite small. Bonsai is the ancient Japanese art of growing an exact replica of a real tree in miniature. And when I say miniature, I mean a version the size of an indoor plant that just breaks the laws of nature. To keep the tree small, you have to resort to hundreds of different tricks. The roots are cut, the branches are tied up with wire, and leaves are aligned. Just like a normal tree, bonsai trees can take years or even decades to grow. That's why entire generations are engaged in this art. One could say that humans themselves create the bug of nature. This, of course, is not the only example. People like to interfere in everything. For example, by blowing up already worked out sections of mines and creating giant holes. But sometimes nature manages to do this on its own, and even goes a step further by filling them with water. Such sinkholes are called cenotes, and some of them, like the Angelita cenote, look like one big glitch. Just think of it, a lake with a separate river at the bottom. This river, where salty water meets fresh water, is also covered with a thick cloud of hydrogen sulfide. The only thing missing is some ancient monsters ready to devour anyone who descends deep enough. However, hydrogen sulfide is already dangerous enough. Even an experienced diver plunging through a murky cloud can experience a panic attack. And if you breathe at the wrong time, the gas will simply poison you. Not underwater, of course, where the result will be somewhat different. But you can meet such a poisonous fog on the surface as well. Most often it's left behind by erupting volcanoes. As if the problems with chunks of rock, ash, and lava weren't enough, and yet some volcanoes are active almost constantly, like Tanzania's Ol Doinyo Lengai. But I didn't bring it up because of the constant eruptions. The volcano has the coldest lava on Earth. Not so cold that you can touch it, of course. The lava erupts at about 265 degrees Fahrenheit. Compared to the standard 425 to 650 degrees, the lava of El Doinyo Lengai is really quite cool. That's because of its composition, which has almost no silicates. As a result, the temperature during the eruption is so low that the lava looks black, gray, or dark brown. If Orodruin erupted that way, Lord of the Rings wouldn't be half as epic as we're used to. Frodo, take the ring to Mordor and throw it in the dirt! We'll see you later.